This is absolutely an amazing conference, and Steve and I were just talking. We're listening to the sounds that people are making in response to comments that are being made. And for me, I'm actually getting an education because it's really all about what people here are thinking and what they're experiencing. And so kudos to you and continue to provide that feedback. It's really important. How many of you have heard about the T1D Exchange? Okay, good. So the T1D Exchange was founded in 2008 as a way of gathering data about people living with the disease. And all of us who take care of patients have stories of, oh, I've seen this, and oh, I've seen that, and a patient of mine had a low, or a patient of mine had a high, or is it a high A1C that puts people at risk for hypoglycemia, or is it a low A1C? We have the DCCT. How does all of that fit together? And so in 2008, this brainchild of a couple of really smart people, Dana Ball and David Panzira from the Helmsley Charitable Trust, put together this program. And what I'm going to do is, I am not an employee of theirs, but I'm going to share with you information that's in the public domain. So, like many other registries in other disease states, nothing like this existed in type 1 diabetes. So it's a health data registry from over 28,000 individuals, giving trends, insights, and discoveries about type 1 diabetes. Lots of observations that have led to some questions, which I'll share with you in just a moment. 81 clinics in the trial network across the country, caring for more than 100,000 people with type 1, and over 120 physicians and caretakers providing care. So now you have essentially a clinical trial network where you can easily recruit patients because you have this well-characterized registry. And one of the greatest obstacles in doing research is actually being able to find the patients and recruit them. 2,000 biosamples, things like urine, hair, and even stool, whose blood and samples were drawn as part of their participation in some of the clinical trials that the T1D Exchange executed on. And an army of individuals, about 2,000, who've agreed, raise their hand and say, I'll donate a sample if you need me to. Here's my contact information. This is what you need to know about me having the disease. And then there's a platform called Glue. It's myglue.org. You can find it online where individuals share lessons learned and also participate in surveys and research. So let's drill down a little bit on the registry and clinical trial network. This is the distribution of sites. It's not as good as TCOYD, but it's getting close. And you can see that all the sites look exactly the same in terms of how the buildings have been built. Just making sure you're awake. Okay, where are these individuals coming from? There are 81 clinics, and on this side you can see the types of patients. So it's not just pediatrics, but it's adult, pediatric, and then combined. And what kind of setting are these people being seen in? Well, most of them are seen in institutions. And every time I hear that word institution, my mind goes straight to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I don't know why. 16 in community and 1 in managed care settings. All right, so I want you to think as I talk, do you identify with any of the information about what I'm about to show you? Does this speak to you? Do you think that this is a representation of what people living with the disease, including you and the caretakers, et cetera, experience for yourselves? So this is the age distribution, and you can see on this side of the graph, you see less than 6 to 13, and you'll see this theme throughout most of the slides with the same color combination. But look at this, about 1,000 people older than 65 that are included in the registry. So it really crosses, the entire lifespan of people living with the disease. And we asked yesterday for how many people have had diabetes for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, and look at this. There are about 1,200 people who have diabetes for greater than equal to 40 years. And when you begin to collect information, it's really important to look at the entire journey of the lives of people living with type 1 diabetes. Now, I want you all to take a look at this. This basically shows 2 time periods of data cuts from within the registry. And you can see that overall, in 2010 to 2012, about 57% of individuals in the registry, again, across all the ages, were using insulin pumps, And on the most recent cut, 2015 to 2016, 63%. And here you have that same schema across the age group, and you can see that there is increasing adoption over a relatively small period of time, maybe not the most representative group of people in the world living with diabetes. I know you may be uncomfortable, but how many people in the room are using insulin pumps? Holy smoke. So it's like 80% here, or 90%. How about CGM? Holy smoke. That's amazing. Okay. So this is information that sometimes the manufacturers find interesting, but again, this is in the public domain. You can go to the website and find information like this. About 55% of individuals on Medtronic pumps, 21% on Animas, 14% Insulet, Tandem 8%, and then some others. And this is rapidly changing as forces in the marketplace, including reimbursement, and some people have had struggles with United Healthcare. Anybody experience that with, not being allowed to continue with any other insulin platform but Medtronic, right? So that's going on too. Now, what about racial disparities? I'm going to show you a little bit of more information about racial disparities later in terms of how people, African Americans and Hispanics versus whites, are doing in terms of A1C values, and it's not as simple as you may think. It's not just socioeconomic or demographic, but there may be a much more important question that needs to be answered that comes through observation. So here you can see racial disparities in pump use. And in the orange, you have whites, in the blue, African Americans, and in the green, Hispanic. And you can see that across these three populations, there is a difference in the younger kids, less than 18, and the older kids, greater than 18. And that, older kids, I'm talking about 18 to 65 or 70, as you know from Dr. Edelman. So, come on, that's supposed to give you a giggle. Thank you. All right. So what about CGM use? And again, the same schema on this slide. You see the younger people here, the older people here, and you can see a tremendous jump in the percentage of individuals using CGM on the younger side, 4% to 39% in those two data cuts. And just look up here for a second, the overall CGM usage, quite low, but then this big bump. And that has to do, I think, more with approval of use of CGM in younger kids than it has to do necessarily with all of a sudden this increase in adoption. But some of the information and some of the work that the JDRF has sponsored on CGM trials continues to sort of percolate through and influence how people use CGM. And again, more and more studies that show the effectiveness of CGM in management of diabetes, I think has contributed a lot to the change in percent of people using it. All right. What is the state of affairs with sugar control? Okay, so here is a slide that's quoted in almost every single medical meeting across the world, and it's the average current hemoglobin A1C by age. And as you can see, as you get older, from a young age, partly because there's less tolerance for hypoglycemia by the healthcare team and parents, you have a higher A1C, but then it skyrockets to about 9% or so in the adolescents, and it takes up to about, I would say, 13 or 14 years until it starts to come back to target range, whatever that is. And as I listen to my language and I say control and compliance and normal and abnormal, I become I cringe, because the fact is we shouldn't be using this kind of terminology because it can be very, very upsetting to people because words are heavily loaded. But as I tell parents all the time, your 17-year-old is not part of the human race. Adolescents leave the human race. They do return. They do return. So just hold on. They will be back. All right. So Aaron showed this slide just a couple of minutes ago, but what it does is it compares the 2012 cohort to the 2015 cohort, same color scheme, less than 7.5% for the younger people, less than 7% goal for the older people, and you can see it's we're not doing a good job. And I say we, I mean all of us, the whole ecosystem, and a large part of that is we haven't given the right tools. And despite all the advances that we've made, which have been amazing since 1921, there hasn't been that much difference in terms of insulins, for example. You know, insulin is still insulin. And JDRF and other organizations are working tirelessly to be sure that we can make advances and continue to provide patients everything that they need. But at the end of the day, we still have a long way to go. Now, big controversy. Can you do better if you are on a pump or a CGM as compared to not? And if I was on a desert island, stranded on an island, I would find that if I had a choice of a CGM plus a pump versus CGM plus injections versus no CGM, et cetera, I would always opt for CGM first, because I think that all of us agree that CGM, in fact, improves outcomes, but there are plenty of people who are on injection therapy who are doing just as well as those on insulin pumps. Despite that, the data from the exchange shows that, again, across all age groups, those on injections have higher A1Cs than those on pumps. And as I just mentioned a moment ago, this is true also for those using CGM. Now, it could be that the population of the individuals in the registry are not necessarily representative of all patients living with diabetes, because it's not a let's enroll every single person that walks through the door in the clinic. It's really more about we're going to recruit people, we're going to ask them to join, so what's the nature of the people who join the registry versus those who don't? Okay. This was a seminal study that demonstrated, in fact, in both young and older people, regardless of whether or not you were using insulin pump or injections, the more frequent finger sticks you did, the better was your A1C. In the state of Washington, they wanted to limit strips to 1 per day in individuals with type 1 diabetes. Yes, and this data played a very important role in getting the state to change the way that they were perceiving it. Earl Hirsch, there he is. Earl Hirsch played a very, very big role in that as well. Okay, so what about the rest of the world? So let's take a look at this, right? Is this a US phenomenon or not? And this is a database called SWEET, and you can see the little dots showing the countries that are represented. And it is also, SWEET has now started a few sites in the United States. Also a way of certifying and registering sites as being really good at delivering diabetes care. So let's take a look. They have 19,000 pediatric patients with type 1 diabetes. 40% are on insulin pumps, much lower than what you saw in the registry just a moment ago. Only 4% CGM users in the UK. Getting approval for CGM use is very challenging. 38% have an A1C under 7.5%. But still 20% have over 9%. So it still remains an elusive goal. I mentioned racial differences, so let's take a look at that. Okay, so this is an observation that was made. And here you have in the orange African Americans and in the blue whites. And I think everyone can see that when you compare overall, African Americans have an A1C of about 9.7%. and whites have an A1C of about 8.3%. Why? Anybody want to take a stab at it? Yes? Diet. So you think it's food choices? Money? Access to technology or access to therapies? Exercise? Biology. Where's the biology? Biology. Hold on, okay? Because I think, again, the assumptions that we make when we look at data are assumptions that we make, and what we need to understand is what are the possible confounding factors? What are the possible explanations for observations that we see? And I'm going to show you, yes?
I don't think that in those communities, I don't think they're aware of the complications and they don't have the same resources as everybody else has.
So the gentleman in the back said that it's a matter of not having enough awareness about complications, and that this could potentially, if they had greater awareness, this could potentially influence outcomes. I think that that's 100% correct. And it's a travesty if that, in fact, is what's going on, that African Americans or Hispanics are not being educated in the same way or not being provided that information, for example, as compared to whites. And by the way, I think you're right in many respects, and it's obviously a very sensitive issue, but hard to say exactly whether or not that's a significant contributor. Yeah?
For the elderly and African-American populations that I talk to is fear of medical practitioners.
Fear of medical practitioners. I think that's all right. Okay, so let's take a look. So how do you turn an observation, which is what that is, into a question or a study? Do African Americans actually have higher A1Cs? Well, this is just the answer to the question. And it is, if you look at the data, and I'm sparing you the data because of time, but in essence, African Americans who have A1Cs of 6.5 have the same levels of glucose in terms of time and range as a white with an A1C of 6.3. And when you go up to A1C of 10%, 9.6%. So when we talk about effectiveness of therapies and we say if you improve by 0.4%, that means that therapy is more effective than what you had before. But in essence, if to start with the differences are 0.4%, what kind of message are we communicating? What does it really mean? And is there, in fact, this difference? So this now, I think, may help you understand why A1C should not be the end-all and be-all of outcomes. Yes, it's still important in terms of what is been traditionally looked at as A1C, as outcomes, and the correlation between A1C and complications. But look at this. This is A1C against mean glucose. So you can have an A1C of 8 with a glucose mean of 140 to 217. All right, just think about that for a second, okay? So, you know, the JDRF, other organizations, and other advocates have gone to the regulators and FDA and others to say, hey, it's got to be beyond A1C. We want you to think about approval for things beyond A1C. We want you to think about showing effectiveness for things beyond A1C. There's going to be a lot more to come about that. Now, Steve had mentioned, Dr. Edelman had mentioned the DCCT, right? So how low can you go? So we showed, the DCCT showed that severe hypoglycemia happens more frequently or at a greater occurrence the lower the A1C goes. And so many of us have backed off and said, you know, you've had a hypoglycemia, your A1C is too low, so we have to now give you some more breathing room and let your A1C rise. So the T1D Exchange went out and looked at a whole bunch of different registries across the globe. So the T1D Exchange, Western Australia in the middle, I know it doesn't look like it, and then some European countries with registries. Just 3 points to bring home here. The T1D Exchange, the DPV, which is the European registries, and the Western Australia. The first is, here you have the age groups, here you have the A1Cs. So what's clear is that Europe seems to be doing better in terms of oops. No, I'm not done yet. Okay. So you can see that in terms of A1Cs, Europe is doing much better than Western Australia or United States. So that's interesting. How can we learn best practices? What is their secret sauce? What is it that they're doing that we're not doing? And without observations like this, diet, who's had foie gras lately? Or baguettes. You ever watch the baguettes coming out of the backpacks or in the bicycles? Okay. So in the orange, it's those who've experienced greater than one severe hypoglycemia, and the blue is those who have not. And what do you see across all 3 of these registries? It doesn't matter at any level of A1C that your risk for severe hypoglycemia is the same. Now, this flies in the face of the DCCT, hard to explain, hard to put all of this information together and make sense of it, but it is intriguing. Okay, who has gone on a CGM and then stopped using a CGM? Okay, how many of you who've stopped using a CGM are now back on a CGM? Is it the same people? Okay. So in the registry, the question was asked, what are the most common reasons for you to stop the use of CGM? And again, I want you to think of this within your own experience. So problems with CGM working properly or not accurate enough? Show of hands. Okay? And I'm not for discontinuation, just in terms of your experience with using CGM. Okay. Problems with the sensor insertion or adhesive. Too expensive, not covered by insurance. Kaiser. Sensor was uncomfortable to wear. Using a pump and did not want to use two sites on the body. And the CGM was too big. Does this make sense in terms of what you would expect people to respond to? Yes? Okay. Anyway, that's my last slide. Thank you very much for listening and for your attention.